I think we're live.
Hello, hello.
Hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
Good evening, wherever it is you are.
Wherever you're watching from. So thank you so much for joining us. And we just want to share a little bit about the recent trip we've been on and dive into the topic for today, which is cross-cultural communications.
Yeah, so we were just in a beautiful part of China, and it's a place that I used to teach. I taught there for a year.
Yeah.
Called Yunnan. So this is southwestern China, near the border of Tibet and Myanmar, and it's a wonderful place, extremely biologically diverse, but also extremely culturally diverse. And it was Mary Daphne's first time there.
It was, yeah. He's been talking about it for years.
Yeah.
We have to go to Yunnan.
Exactly. Yeah.
Finally.
And so we finally made it there. And it was, a terrific experience.
It really was.
Right? I mean, maybe you can talk about it. It's your first time there. So
yeah, I mean,
what were your impressions?
I hadn't known so much about it. I didn't know so much about it. And I remember you telling me about the pu'er tea, which I'm a huge tea fan. And so pu'er is from Yunnan. And it's this really delicious fermented tea. And they have a both cooked version and a raw version.
When we say fermented, think about like a French cheese where you age it over time, or a wine even, right? Where it sort of matures and develops its own characteristics by virtue of aging.
So it's a really delicious tea. It's full body and earthy in flavor. And I'm obsessed with it. So anyway, that's really all I knew. And I knew that, of course, my husband taught there and loved it there. And we went on a hike, and it was actually a few hikes, and it was absolutely spectacular. Some of the most majestic mountains I have ever seen.
Yeah.
And it was so quiet too. I mean, we were virtually the only ones on the mountain. Well, not really, but we did bump into people.
Yeah, it was off season. So fewer people than normal.
Yeah.
If you go during the Chinese holidays, boy,
really
let me
crowded,
tell you.
Right? Yeah.
Anywhere in China that's beautiful during their holidays, because they're very strict about their holidays, can get super crowded. So if you're visiting,
try to go off season.
Go off season. Yeah.
No, but it was great. But we bumped into people. We said hello. And what I really liked was that, I mean, we didn't speak, you speak the language, but I don't speak Mandarin. And so we just, a smile and a thumbs up or a okay sign. And we had this camaraderie, and we had this sort of mutual encouragement for each other as we walked by people who were also climbing this mountain.
Yeah.
So through the nonverbals, we were able to,
That's true. There is
connect.
This camaraderie, this sort of social connection you have with other hikers.
Definitely.
Because I think the idea of going out into the mountains, into the woods, and sort of walking might seem strange to some people, right?
Yeah.
Certainly, I remember the first time I was there, and we walked through some village at one point. This was several years ago. And a couple of the people in the village asked, what are you guys doing? And we said, well, we're walking. And they asked, well,
why would you be doing that?
Why are you doing that? Why don't you take a car?
Yeah, exactly. or a donkey or something.
Well, no,
we saw a few donkeys.
They were like, you should be in a Jeep. Like, don't walk. What are you doing walking? It's going to take a lot longer. It's a lot harder.
You're exerting yourself.
Exactly. So there's no question, I think in some cultures, hiking is a thing that people do, and for enjoyment.
Right.
And in other cultures,
it's a means to an end.
It's a means to an end.
You're trying to get from point A to point B.
It's a suboptimal form of transportation.
Right. It's funny. But it's true. Yeah. It's all about
but for that reason, I think when you run into other hikers, you sort of look at each other like, yeah, I get why you're here, and good on you for making the effort.
And then what was that expression that you said? Like, add more oil, add more oil.
Oh,
that was a transliteration.
There's a terrific Chinese phrase for keep going, like keep it up.
Keep it up. You've got this.
And it's called 加油, 加油. So 加 means to add, and yo is oil. So it's basically like add gasoline to the tank, like keep going.
Keep hustling.
And so that was always fun to use. You say it to other people, they say it to you. And
so out of context, you might be like, what do you mean add oil? To what? To my like Camelback? What am I adding oil to? But then within the context, you understand, okay, well, this must be a way of encouraging the hikers to keep going. So it's a lot of the time, and we have the video about communicative competence, and we talk about how language and culture are intertwined. You really can't separate one from the other. And so it's so important that when you're doing, when you're having these cross-cultural communication experiences, that you keep that in mind, that there's always the subcontext, there's the cultural context within what the language is embedded, right? So I think that's something that is really important to keep in mind.
Absolutely. And one of the best reasons, I think, to learn another language is because you learn about that culture too, right? The language and the culture are so tightly intertwined that
important.
I know it when I go to countries where I don't speak the language, which is a lot of countries, because fewer than you, because you speak a lot more languages than I do.
But a really hard one, Mandarin.
But the thing is, when you get to that country and you don't speak the language, it's not only that you can't communicate, using your words.
Yeah.
You also struggle to communicate on a more fundamental level, because that by virtue of not knowing the language, you also don't necessarily understand why they're doing the things they do.
Absolutely.
Right?
Definitely. So why is it important then to know how to communicate across cultures?
Well, I think that different cultures have so much to share with each other.
Yes.
Right? I think one of the most important reasons to have this cross-cultural communications skill set is because when you take yourself out of an environment that you're used to and put yourself in an unfamiliar environment, you open up an incredible learning opportunity.
Definitely.
And by learning how to communicate effectively across cultures doesn't necessarily require that you know that culture directly. But if you can sort of establish some skills and strategies for communicating in cultures that you're unfamiliar with, you're able to tap in and start to learn in a way that you really couldn't, sort of sitting around at home in a culture that you're already very familiar with.
Right. And I think a lot of it comes down to, well, in my experience, two things. One, I think from the perspective of the person who is trying to learn that second language, the L2, the second language, or the culture, is to really try to take risks with the language, the expressions, to try it out. But then I will caveat that with saying that, because you're taking risks and you're out of your comfort zone, so to speak, which is really the only way I think people can really learn, right? We can learn, is really through trial and error, right? So you try something out and then it might not go, but then you'll get feedback from that community. And also I think it's important to say, look, I'm still learning the language. I'm still not that familiar with this culture, but I really want to get to know it better. I really want to, expand my horizons. I think keeping that in mind, so having an open mind, taking risks, and then just saying, please correct me. Please, I don't mean any harm if I, make the wrong gesture or do something differently that inadvertently offended somebody, right? Because these are things that happen. They really do. Miscommunication happens, especially with this cross-cultural communication. But that's okay, right? That's okay.
Yeah. No, I think you brought up a really good point, which is related to, I think, what we were talking about in some of our previous live sessions, which is that sort of process of taking a risk, right? And that's part of the learning process, for sure.
Definitely.
Right? By taking a risk, like we discussed last time, you're forcing yourself to acclimate to something new.
Yeah.
And that activates different parts of your brain that aren't used as much.
Yes.
And just by activating those parts of your brain, you start to think of new ideas, new thoughts, new solutions.
Yeah.
And it can be a really eye-opening experience. Even this trip that we just took, I have to say, I hadn't been to China for several years.
Yeah.
And so going there and returning to it, just that 1 week that we spent there really did expand my mind. I felt more creative. And I think we came back with quite a few ideas in terms of
Yeah.
sort of material that we want to expand on.
Yeah.
They also have a variety of technology that is light years ahead of, some of the stuff elsewhere in the world. Their payment systems in particular.
Oh my gosh, it's so cool.
So everything
So
you pay
convenient.
with a QR code there. So you scan it. It might be like that in some other countries as well.
Yeah.
It's not like that in the US yet, let me tell you. So the US is quite behind when it comes to payment systems.
I love that we still have our Metro cards.
Oh,
in
yeah.
the subways and the buses.
Exactly.
Like,
it's totally old school. It's one step removed from tokens.
Well, I mean, our subway is like from the 70s, right?
Yeah. Well, we're talking about
New York City.
The New York City subway. Yeah.
Yeah. I just remember when I was in France studying abroad. I mean, this was years ago. It's over 10 years ago. And they already had the card. They call it the carte Navigo. And it's basically the magnetic, the card that you can have in the bottom of your bag. You just put your bag onto the, like where the turnstile is.
I see.
And you go through. You don't have to go through digging.
Yeah, that's
through your purse. You just that was so great. I just loved it.
Totally.
But it's really important to experience different cultures, I think. I mean, we both love doing that. And so I think we're huge proponents of it. And you just like you get out of the echo chamber. And I'm not talking about the echo chamber that's on social media and showing up in our feeds. I'm talking about
that's with you everywhere you go.
Yeah. I'm talking about the echo chamber that we just have, in our friend groups or in our tribes or wherever it is that we feel comfortable, right? And I think it's so important to get out of that so that you can learn about different perspectives and points of view and worldviews. And you might not agree with it all, but you also, might learn something, and you probably will learn something.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm curious. And if nothing comes to mind, no worries. But was there any point in this trip that we took where you encountered a cultural situation that surprised you, that, forced you to sort of activate, some of your cross-cultural communication skills? Can you think of anything specific?
So, I mean, nothing really specific comes to mind because I think although I don't speak Mandarin, I feel like, I've had a lot of Chinese students. I have a lot of Chinese friends. Through you too, I feel like soaking up the culture, and I love the food. So I think in some ways I already, know a little bit about the culture. But one thing that sort of comes to mind to answer your question, when we had tea.
Yes.
So we went, of course, into a tea shop in Yunnan because we had to do it. And
Yunnan, as she said, is very much known for their tea.
Oh my gosh, I loved it so much. It was so incredible. I will just say one thing. One thing that I really love about tea is it does lead to great conversations, because think about it. You're talking to somebody, you're sipping on your tea. It's hot, so you have to, you can't chug it. You have to wait. So you naturally have this conversation that flows. And it's so beautiful because conversation leads to one topic and then another and then another. And meanwhile, you're sharing this delicious pot of tea, right? So that's something that I love about tea. But separate of that, when we were in this tea shop, so the pour tea glasses are quite small. So you have to constantly be refilling them. It's very involved, very interactive as well.
Labor intensive.
Which is fun. But anyway, so the woman, the tea lady, I don't know, is there a specific term?
The shopkeeper.
The shopkeeper, but in Chinese, is there a specific?
No.
Not really. Okay.
Yeah. I
was going to think like the tea master or something. Anyway, she kept refilling our glasses. And then she kept pressing, the electric teapot to boil some more water and more. And I didn't know. I mean, I could have kept going and going and going. I didn't know at what point it was polite or impolite to say, okay, thank you. That's enough. I'm fine now with the tea.
Yeah.
Like, do you know what I mean? Like, how do you say, okay, thank you so much. I've had enough. I'm sated.
Yeah. It's so funny you bring that up, because that same thing, we didn't communicate this when we were sitting down there. So just to paint the picture for you, we're in this nice little shop. We were sort of browsing their wares, and they invited us to take a seat and share some tea with them and maybe sample some of the stuff that we might purchase.
Yeah.
And so we, of course, did, and So they started serving us this tea, and it was delicious. But I had the exact same realization about a half hour in.
Yeah, I think
right?
we stayed there for like an hour and a half.
Yeah, we were there for a while.
It was a while.
Well, no, I don't think we were an hour and a half, but about a half hour in,
okay.
I started thinking, when should we wrap this up, right? I feel like,
how do you exit? What's your exit strategy? Like, because in American culture, it's kind of rude to be super direct about it and say, thank you, I'm done. Like, this is finished. Like, we're done here. That's a bit rude, right? You sort of have to ease into it. You have to hedge a little bit. Say, well, really enjoyed that tea. Oh, look at the time. Like, you know what I mean? There are different cues you can give. So I had no idea. I was relying on Greg. You really did a good job though with it.
Well, I think in the US culture, it's more common. I wouldn't say this is always the case, but it is more common that the host can signal the time, right? In general, I think the host feels a little reticent to do that.
Yeah.
But it's okay for the host to sort of say, okay, actually, I have to go pick up my kid from
you make
school,
like a future mention.
Right. You make a future mention. In some way, you signal that it's time to sort of
wrap up,
part ways. In China, I think that's much less common. And so that only occurred to me, like I was saying, about a half hour in, when I was like, she may never stop pouring.
Yeah, it's going to be like 10 p.m.
And we may be here through dinner, and then they're going to invite us to dinner. And,
just because it's a polite thing to do.
Because it's a polite thing to do.
It's not maybe actually what
Right. They probably wanted to what they really want to do is close the sale. Let's be honest. I mean, we're in the shop.
Right, of course.
They want to sell some tea. Right, and the faster they can get us out, they get someone else in to sit down and do the same drill.
But the funny thing was that it was not just one tea we tried. I think we tried like 4 or 5 different teas, and they kept taking it out of the tins and showing us, okay, look at this type of tea. And this one is from, this is also Yunnan tea. What was the one I loved? I love pu'er. But the other one I love was
the Dianhong. Dianhong is considered a mountain tea? You read the description.
Yeah, it's a mountain tea.
Yeah, it's sort of above average type of Yunnanese tea, which Yunnanese tea is already above average. And what's it called?
It's just
Golden
so
tip.
Refined. Yeah, they have different names.
Okay.
The first time I encountered it, or something similar, but I'm convinced it was that. It was the golden horse eyebrow.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And then the second time when we were in Yangshuo, I found that it was called golden monkey or something.
Right.
And then this time around, it was Dianhong, right? Dianhong.
Yeah.
And it has like a honey taste to it.
And a beautiful golden color.
Good. Oh, love it.
So anyways, they keep serving us this tea.
Yeah,
and I realized we actually are probably going to be the ones that have to initiate the next step in this process. And so at that point, I basically said, okay, this tea is delicious. We'll buy it. And immediately once we said that, the tea stopped boiling and they smiled and you said, okay, great. And we started sort of going through that next part of the process. It was evident that as soon as I had initiated it, this is what they were sort of hoping for us to do.
To close the sale.
And I think
which makes sense. I mean, that's what they're there to do, right?
Exactly. And I think this would apply, though, not just in a sort of commerce context. I think in general, the expectation is, as a host, you're not going to kick the person out.
Of course.
And so it's sort of, you're obligated to continue serving them until they signal, the guests, they meaning the guests, are ready to leave. And that's, as Americans, I think, not something we were sort of as prepared for. And it took a little, probably longer than they were expecting to sort of, for us to signal that next stage in the communication process.
Yeah. So that was one way of sort of trying to figure out, how do we politely move on and, thank them for the amazing tea and then be on our merry way so that they can also serve the next customer.
Yeah. Another really interesting cultural difference, this is actually within China that I noticed, is
because there is a lot of diversity. And
China's huge.
So many different dialects. Oh, can I just say the funny story?
Yeah, please.
So when we were on our bus getting to the trailhead on one of the hikes, Gregory was the only person who could actually speak Mandarin and English, and he was translating to a huge group.
Informally.
There were Asians there were Europeans there were Americans there, and I was so surprised that somebody who was from a different part of China, could not communicate in Mandarin with the bus driver. And then you had to step up.
Yeah.
I thought that, I was like, wow, this is so incredible, because you can't just take for granted that everyone knows Mandarin. There's so many different dialects, and Cantonese and Mandarin are not necessarily, they're actually quite different.
Very different.
And so that was just like really eye-opening to me. And I was really proud of you for being able to translate.
It was a funny situation for sure, because I was, I felt like the tourist there, but on the other hand, I was the only person that could communicate between the bus driver and the majority of the people on the bus.
And this was important because they were trying to figure out where they were going to leave their baggage, because they were going to stay on the mountain for 2 nights.
Yeah,
and it was quite important.
These were critical logistics. Where to start the trail so that you don't get lost and go down the wrong road. So
anyway, I digressed.
No.
So what were you gonna say?
That was a funny story.
I just wanted to mention it.
What I was going to bring up is that, okay, so as we just discussed, China is a big place, and different parts of China have different ways of doing things.
Yeah.
And what I noticed, a major difference between Yunnan and the rest of China is in the way that they sell something, right?
Yes.
And so when you are in other parts of China, when you go to a shop, particularly somewhere that's sort of focused on tourists, but really it's, even if you go to a general market, open air market, you will find that people are very proactively pushing the sale to you, right? They're reaching out to you. Here's this product. Do you want it? Do you want it? How much? How much? Right? They're sort of almost in your face about getting you to buy this thing.
Parts of New York are like that too.
Parts of New York like that. Yeah, you see us around. What was fascinating about Yunnan is that it wasn't that way.
Yeah.
And instead, it was much more, this is my shop. Come in if you want.
This is what I have
Right,
here.
right. They're not reaching out to you. They're just sort of sitting tranquilly. And if you come in, they might acknowledge you, but they might not even.
Yeah.
It's a totally different experience.
Very laissez-faire.
Yeah.
Really pleasant.
As the consumer, it was really pleasant. But there's another important aspect to it that I think is more so about communication, which is not only are they more relaxed about coming into their shop, they also hit you with a real price up front.
Yes.
Right. So in the places where people are sort of more aggressively trying to sell you something, they're typically marking up their sale 300, 400%, sometimes more, right? Huge, vast quantities, sums above what the product actually costs. In Yunnan, that's not the case.
Yeah.
And so there, they actually give you the price they want to sell it at. And you might be able to shave a little bit off, but really they're coming to you with the price they want to sell. And the reason I think this is really important from a cultural communications perspective is that if you only knew what it was like to buy these products in the rest of China, where there's this intense, aggressive sales process, when you got to Yunnan, you might actually get into quite a tense situation with the shopkeeper because you're going to assume that they're going to also be marking up their products 400, 500%.
Yeah, because you're operating on the assumption that that's how it's done.
That's how it's done. And what a skill that you can use that we were talking about before that you can use to sort of avoid falling into that awkward situation is sort of reading the body language and the context.
Definitely.
Right? And so it was pretty much immediately clear by how relaxed these people were.
Definitely.
That they weren't out there to sort of take as much money as they could from you.
The other thing also I noticed was that, they weren't trying to speak English to us.
Yeah.
Like they weren't, because a lot of times, like in different countries I've been to, if you look like you, even if you don't look like somebody who, I don't know, if you look like you might not speak the language that they speak, they'll try a language that they think you might know. And a lot of times that's English, even if you don't know English, right?
Right.
And so it's funny when they put that on you, they try to, lure you into the shop by speaking a language they think you know.
Right. To make it more sort of welcoming.
Exactly.
And so forth.
Exactly. And we didn't have any of that,
Yeah. No, it was a
anything,
really
some
relaxed
people were
process.
trying to speak Mandarin to me.
Yeah.
And you knew it.
They were. But that idea of sort of reading the context.
So important.
And just because you're in China doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be this way.
Yes.
And by reading the context and going beyond what your existing understanding of a situation is, right? Being hyper aware, sort of the situation, can really serve you well when it comes to that cross-cultural communication.
Yeah.
Because I think we correctly assume that these people were probably giving us the real price.
Yes.
And I at one point actually tried to talk someone down just a little bit, and they're like, no, sorry, this is the price. And it was only a small amount, and I knew from that little exchange that for sure
this is the real deal.
Yeah, these were giving us the real
People were
price.
being honest. Yeah, it's important.
Yeah.
I think the other thing to kind of be aware of when dealing with cross-cultural context is to try to shake our minds of this cultural stereotype that we might sort of be ruminating over, because they're pretty detrimental to the interactions that you might have with people from a certain speech community or cultural group or subculture. If you have this idea that this is how it's done in that context. But I know it's a little abstract, but I think it's really important that you sort of, instead of thinking about what you think, how things are done in that language or culture, you really just pay attention to tone of voice, nonverbals, micro expressions, the expressions that flash across your face within a fraction of a second.
Yeah.
All of these little cues that just as humans, we are attuned to, right? And that go beyond culture and language. It's just part of, our humanity.
Yeah, it's a really good point, because if you think about it, just think about, put yourself in your own shoes, right? Think about the people around you. They're different people, and they sort of behave differently. Some of your friends do things this way. Some of your friends do things that way.
You're not all the same.
You're probably all from the same sort of community, yet you do things differently.
Yeah.
So even in that small subset of a bigger population, you have that, effectively, it's cultural diversity. It's certainly behavioral diversity.
Oh, for sure.
And so to assume because someone's from a certain country or a certain culture, they're going to behave XYZ way can be, it's risky, because you could be way off.
Yeah.
And which is why I really like what you're saying, which is, set those aside. You can keep those as sort of, in the back of your mind, but don't view them as dogma, because it could be that this person does things quite differently from, the other people in that sort of context.
And be ready to change your mind.
Yes.
Right? And your opinion. And that's when the magic happens. That's when you can really embrace the diversity, and also notice that there are more similarities than differences between all of us.
Yeah, I love that.
Amazing, right?
You asked at the start of this, what are the advantages of cross-cultural communication?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
One of them is, I think it forces you to have an open mind.
Yes.
And in today's world, like having an open mind is probably one of the most important things that you can do.
Definitely.
In terms of being a responsible global
citizen.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I totally agree with that. By going into a new culture, you're forced to have an open mind, because if you don't, a lot of things are going to upset you. They're going to frustrate you. When you talk to people and they went somewhere and they're like, we didn't like it. We didn't have a good time. We can't handle how they do X, Y, and Z. Well, chances are they would have had more fun if they had had a more open mind when they went there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
I think it's something that seems so sort of like obvious. Of course I'm going to have an open, and then you're in that situation and something might irk you or confuse you or upset you.
Yeah.
And then you're like, okay, actually I do need to have an open mind about this.
Yeah. And I feel like if there's one thing that I would love for people to take away from this conversation today, it is that it's by having an open mind, you are more receptive to input, right?
Yes.
And I don't just mean verbal input, but all the other stuff that you've been talking about, right? The body language, sort of other cues, social
Yes.
cues, maybe just the environment, the way things are laid out, is once you have an open mind, you see more. And when you see more, you're able to intuit more and make a more informed decision about how to behave, how to interact. And that ends up, with you having a better experience and the people you interact with having a better experience with you. So something really important, I think, to take away.
Definitely. And I think related to that, so it's also important on the flip side. Let's say you are welcoming somebody from a different country or culture from your own, and you notice maybe that they say things differently, and maybe they're too direct or too indirect, depending on what culture you're coming from yourself. It's important to also have an open mind by giving that person the benefit of the doubt. Right?
Yeah.
Because I think, some cultures, it is completely appropriate to say something very directly and just maybe even demand something.
Something that you're not sort of accustomed to.
Exactly. And that is that is the way it is done. But if that rubs you the wrong way, then you really just have to say, well, that must be the way it's done there. And if you're closer to this person, you might say, this, I didn't interpret it badly, but, just so that you're aware, in this specific cultural context, we sort of, because I remember when I was
that
abroad,
would be a really good friend.
I remember when I was abroad, I was asking all of my friends, please correct me.
Yeah.
Please correct me. And they were really opposed to it. They didn't want to, hurt my feelings or anything. I said, no, you would be doing me a disservice if you didn't correct me. And they're like,
true.
Okay. And so I made all of
and
my
they probably
friends
still didn't, or it
pledge.
was hard to get them to do it.
But then I found a few close friends who would.
That's great. That's huge.
So
that's a strategy.
So
Talk about
key.
Strategies, finding
so
someone
key.
to help you sort of.
Definitely.
But you're right. Your point was.
You need that feedback.
Well, your previous point was.
Benefit of the doubt.
Give them the benefit of the doubt, because chances are.
They don't know.
People mean well. Most people mean well. Most people
Good
mean well.
Intentions.
And to the extent that you can sort of adopt that mindset, I think you have much more.
Right. So the open mindedness on both sides.
Yeah.
So I think also it's important to notice that, so it's not just the nonverbals, it's the written communication and the oral communication, right? That, you have to sort of navigate and tease apart in a way.
Yeah. So
I think we have one question.
Okay.
I think we're actually, so we got a question about personal space and whether that's part of cross-cultural communication. What do you think?
Personal space?
Yeah, I definitely think so, because proximity,
without a doubt,
space and distance,
totally a cultural thing. Because in the U.S., personal space,
that an arm's length,
right?
Distance.
People like, if you're a stranger, people like to sort of have their distance.
Yeah, it's about like
right,
this.
And to come within that space,
invading. It's invasive.
It feels like you're invading their privacy, and it's not comfortable for them. Certainly in China and elsewhere in Asia.
In Turkey, when I was teaching there.
In Turkey, there's much less of this.
People can get really close
sense
to
of personal space.
That's how it is there.
And it's it can be very, I think, very difficult for people who are unused to that to acclimatize to, right?
Yeah, totally. And I remember that sometimes, like when I was first introduced to that, I was a bit taken aback, because I was just like, oh, but my first reaction was to move a step backward. So as I did that, the other person moved closer to me. So I still did it. So I basically backed up into a.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
But it was fine. It was like not a big deal. It was a colleague, and it was completely fine. And then I slowly understood that, okay, this is how it's done here. And so then I had students come up, and they're like fifth graders or whatnot, and they're like so close.
Yeah, but I think this is such a great example of how cross-cultural communication isn't just verbal, right?
And you learn it.
It's physical.
You learn about it.
It's sort of
Oh yeah.
conceptual, right? There's
Yeah.
there's so many different layers to
Mhm.
that. And that's just one of those things where, to the extent that you can prepare yourself for that before you go into that culture,
Try to.
you'll have a better time.
Yeah.
And even if you're not prepared for it,
That's
by
okay.
keeping that mindset open, you can think of it as, okay, well, this person bumped into me. I don't think he was trying to shove me out of the way. Instead, it might just be that here,
That's how it's done.
That's how it's done, right? If you need to get to the front, you're gonna sort of use your body to do that. But that's sort of how it goes. And by being open to it, by assuming the best in people's intentions, you can just sort of laugh it off and continue to have a good day.
Definitely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we can talk about the takeaways from sort of this conversation. So definitely having an open mind, being able to take risks so that you can improve, and, really explore and explearn the culture and the language better than you would if you hadn't taken risks. And then making sure that you sort of keep the benefit of the doubt, give them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the positive sort of interpretation.
Yeah. Well, my takeaway, frankly, is that the most important thing you can do is take that first step into going into these different cultures, right? It's very easy to sort of stay where you are and in a place where you're comfortable and familiar with.
Yeah.
And I get that not everyone necessarily has the flexibility and freedom to go into a different culture, but you can do that in other ways, right? You can do that online even. There are ways to sort of expose yourself to cultures that are different than your own. There are plenty of free resources for learning languages if that's your approach.
Yeah.
But there's also just tons of communities and forums, even in your own language, that are probably quite different culturally from the one in your immediate location. So by doing that, you do give yourself the opportunity to practice some of these things that we've discussed today.
Definitely.
And in doing so, you also open up your mind, and I think you can benefit enormously, both personally and professionally, but from doing so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. It's great.
Yeah. So anyways, that's a little bit of our trip to China and our sort of insights from that process. Hopefully you guys found that interesting and helpful. We'd love to hear from you in terms of
your own experiences, questions you might have, anything related to communicating across cultures.
Yeah. I'm sure you guys have all been there at some point. And if you haven't, it's time to take that first step.
Definitely.
All right.
Just a quick announcement about next week's live,
yes.
Right?
Next week, we are going to be doing this 1 hour earlier.
Right. Because
it's daylight savings time in the US. So if you're in the US, these will now be at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time as opposed to 9:30. So 1 hour earlier will be the same day. That's it.
So that's a wrap on this live stream. Feel free to comment below after you watch, if you watch later.
Yeah. Thanks again for watching.
Thank you. Say a different lesson. So I hope you can tune into that.
Perfect.
Happy explearning.
See you guys.